features lectures by national leaders in the areas of recruiting, retaining, and graduating a diverse population of students in science, technology, engineering, and mathematical sciences and medicine. And it's part of our commitment to make Ohio State's STEM programs more equitable and inclusive. As many of you know, the diversity issue has been a long, stubborn challenge in STEM education. And today, with increasing global competition and the critical need of STEM talent, it becomes ever important to increase the diversity in STEM education. So the diversity in mind, in culture, in background, and also academic expertise is clearly linked to the quality of our future STEM workforce. And so in many ways, the diversity is an indicator of excellence. The question here is, how can we effectively address the inequity in STEM education? And that will be essential for our future success as a university, as a community, and also as a nation. And so that's why we are kicking off this new seminar series to talk about how can we truly achieve equity in STEM education and what we can do together as a community to move the needle. And with this seminar series, we want to stimulate conversations and also innovative thoughts among our campus community. I want to thank Dr. Beth Hume, her team, and also many colleagues across the Ohio State University for their leadership, their thoughts to initiate this critical discussion. We are very grateful to have Dr. Norman Fortenberry, the Executive Director of American Society for Engineering Education, so-called ASEE, with us tonight to give the first seminar in this series. And before I introduce Dr. Fortenberry, I would like to have a quick housekeeping items to cover. First, we will be recording tonight's lecture, and we will send out an email with a link to the video after the event. And second, if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please use the Q&A tool at the bottom of the screen. Lisa Barclay, the Senior Director of Diversity, Outreach, and Inclusion Programs, and also Interim Assistant Dean and the Chief Diversity Officer at Ohio State's College of Engineering, will join us on the call and will be moderating the Q&A sessions at the end of the presentation. And lastly, you can learn more about the series of this webinar and sign up for the upcoming seminars at go.osu.edu/inclusive-STEM, one word. And so now, without further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague and friend, Dr. Norm Fortenberry. Dr. Fortenberry has dedicated his career to advancing education and promoting diversity in engineering and engineering technology. He is the Executive Director of American Society for Engineering Education, which aims to promote and increase access to education in engineering. Prior to his role at ASCE, Dr. Fortenberry was founding director of National Academy of Engineering's Center for Advancement of Scholarship on Engineering Education. He also held leadership positions at National Science Foundation, and he was executive director of the National Consortium for Graduate Degrees for Minorities in Engineering and Science. Dr. Fortenberry earned his Doctor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from MIT. And so please join me to welcome Dr. Fortenberry. Norm, back to you.
Thank you, Grace. I appreciate the very kind introduction. And I'm just getting my slides set up here. Why is it not? Okay, there we go. And Grace, it's great to see you again. Dr. Wang and I overlapped at the National Science Foundation many years ago. I'm going to tease you folks a little bit. You're known all over the world as the Ohio State University, but I noticed that on the first introductory slide, I couldn't even get a lowercase t, the in front of American Society for Engineering Education. So you apparently save all the articles for yourselves. Just saying. That's a joke, people. Don't take it so seriously. I was asked to speak on ASEE perspectives on necessary components of undergraduate instruction to increase minority participation in engineering. As Grace indicated, this is a topic I've given some thought to throughout my career, so I'm pleased to expound upon it. But my perspectives go beyond my time at ASEE, hence my chosen title of a cross-sector perspective on increasing minority participation in engineering. My perspective is informed by my past positions as a faculty member, NSF official, former executive director of the GEM Consortium and staff member at the National Academy of Engineering, as well as my current position at ASEE. I'm going to speak for about 45 minutes, maybe less because I tend to talk fast. And I have 7 subtopics that I will cover as shown on this slide and reminder slides throughout my talk. Because this is a technical audience, I am compelled to show some data, but I will keep it brief and at a high level. I assume your interest in this topic is driven by the demographic realities that despite achieving after substantial national and institutional investments over a 20-year period, actually longer than that, maybe 40 years, a more than doubling in the percentage of underrepresented minority students among bachelor's engineering graduates to a whopping 16%. That's being sarcastic. Over the same period, the market share of engineering among underrepresented minority BS graduates has fallen from a high of 5% to 3% over the same period. In other words, engineering is getting a smaller share of a greatly increasing population. Oops. Furthermore, disaggregated data by race ethnicity shows declines over roughly the same period for African Americans, Native Americans, Caucasian Americans, and men in general, but increases for Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, and women in general. However, recent press reports indicate that we should anticipate decreases in Hispanic American enrollment due to COVID-19 impacts. Furthermore, pre-COVID demographic projections indicate that between 2026 and 2031, the ranks of high school graduates are expected to drop by 9%, and those students who remain are likely to, we're likely to be fewer white students and more Hispanics with a greater range of academic abilities, fewer high scorers on the SAT and ACT, and stagnant family income. The number of high school graduates is expected to fall by at least 20% in each state in New England, with the exception of Massachusetts, which expects to be down 11%. Ohio, Michigan, and Illinois are expected to be down greater than 15%. Given that engineering typically only engages about 5 to 6% of first-year students, unless something significantly changes, the implications for undergraduate engineering enrollments, tuition receipts, future domestic graduate students, research productivity, and faculty hiring are not good. The cleanest data before the National Center for Education Statistics and NSF started suppressing numbers and lumping engineering with the physical sciences is from 2004 to 2009. Those data show engineering had higher persistence than physical science and computer science and very close to social and behavioral sciences, and was higher than non-science and engineering fields. If we could get that story out, attract a higher percentage of students, especially students from underrepresented minority populations, we might have a shot at maintaining ourselves. But I also hope that beyond narrow self-interest, there is recognition of the very real engineering value of diversity, as elegantly summarized by William Wolfe when he was president of the National Academy of Engineering. So I understand why why retention is of concern and why I was invited to give this talk. The implications of Bill Wolfe's observation are profound. It means that diverse thought improves engineering design and production. But I would go further and assert that in an increasingly technological world, We need people with engineering knowledge, even if they do not practice as engineers. That in order to adequately serve humanity, engineers must understand human needs, and that failure to engage women or ethnic and religious minorities does not make economic or technical sense. And therefore, attention to diversity should be integral to overall efforts to enhance engineering education. But maybe even well-informed opinions are only worth what you pay for them. So let's look at the research base. How do we retain underrepresented minority students? The NSF's Lewis Stokes Alliances for Minority Participation, called LSAMP, or LSAMP for short, is a multi-institutional effort to increase the number of underrepresented minority baccalaureate graduates. I note from your website that you have an LSAMP here at OSU, administered by your Office of Diversity and Inclusion. An absolutely excellent evaluation of the LSAMP program nationally was done by the Urban Institute in 2005. That evaluation found 3 essential steps: academic integration, social integration, and integration into the discipline. The steps target students, but they also require efforts aimed at faculty and the institution. According to the Urban Institute's 2005 evaluation of the LSAMP program, successful academic and social integration activities build on Vincent Tinto's retention model from the 1990s, which posits that academic institutions, through their formal and informal structures, assist the social and academic integration of students and thus encourage persistence in the system. The function of these structures should be to smooth the transition of the student into his or her new environment, encourage the building of learning communities with peers, foster interaction between students, faculty, and staff, identify student needs, provide adequate support, and foster academic involvement and learning, among other activities. Tinto saw the need for retention programs specifically tailored to the needs of different groups of students, such as older students, honor students, students of color, transfer students, and academically at-risk students. He also recognized the value of what he termed breaking down the campus into smaller parts, by which he meant forming smaller communities that are more manageable and less intimidating to students. Integration into the discipline refers to the process by which novices become socialized into the discipline. That is, acquire the habits of mind and practice, as well as the peer and mentor recognition that affirms their identity as future engineers. The research indicates that some groups accumulate advantages important for socialization into engineering, while others do not, with access for certain groups denied for reasons unrelated to their abilities, but related to ascribed characteristics, such as race, ethnicity, and sex. For example, researchers find that African American, Hispanic, and American Indian or Native American students and women of all races and ethnicities are less likely than white or Asian males to be exposed to experiences and opportunities that are the precursors for membership in science and engineering communities. Interventions to expose these underrepresented groups to experiences and opportunities that are important for socialization into science and engineering must be provided by programs whose goal is to increase the participation of underrepresented groups in STEM fields. Similar points are made in the research base of NSF's current Includes, which is short for Inclusion Across the Nation of Communities of Learners of Underrepresented Discoverers in Engineering and Science. So the NSF Includes program. I want to emphasize an important point. These 3 essentials, academic integration, social integration, and integration into the discipline, should not be a surprise. This is what it takes for any student, minority or majority, to be successful. Our effort is to make these supports that are implicitly provided to most majority students, or the students who we have seen typically as what we have called our typical engineering profile, explicitly available to other students, including underrepresented minority students. So what types of activities are we talking about, and where do they fall in this organizational construct? I'm assuming your familiarity with the student-focused activities listed here: academic advising, summer academic enrichment, tutoring, research experiences, mentorships, conference attendance, internships, career awareness, GRE test preparation, graduate school admission support, and Graduate Summer Bridge, since many of these are activities within OSU's own LSAM. But with regard to faculty-focused activities, the focus on effective teaching is a theme that goes back at least to Seymour and Hewitt's 1994 book, Talking About Leaving, in which they documented the departure of talented students from science and engineering because of a lack of engaging and effective teaching. The recommended diversity training speaks to the need to be mindful of conscious and unconscious biases and how those affect the student learning environment. And there are decades of research on the value of directly engaging undergraduates in research as motivation for their academic study and their sense of entry into the profession. It also makes sense to look at institutional policies and practices. In sweeping generalities, I think the engineering community has made substantial progress in course and curriculum reform, much of it either funded by or inspired by the NSF-funded engineering education coalitions of the 1990s. There is much greater vertical and horizontal integration in engineering curricula and ties to messy, quote unquote, real world problems. We increasingly recognize that the old weed out mentality is obsolete, and we must actively compete for our students and demonstrate to them that we care about their progress. We've made some progress in reducing the rigidity in our curriculum and providing students with greater freedom to mix and match engineering coursework to fashion degree programs more suited to their personal and professional goals. While we may need to continue to make progress in providing relevance to applications of interest to students, I will discuss that in greater detail later. Beyond discussion of collaborations among sets of institutions, the Urban Institute report does not provide great depth in discussing institutional policies. However, in 2012, ASEE, with support from NSF, released a report that built on our retention analyses efforts supported by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. The report and the NSF effort were tied to recognition by the Obama White House of the commitment of engineering deans to enhancing the numbers of engineering graduates, especially via improved retention strategies. ASEE conducted a review of literature and documented over 60 strategies and practices that were identified as effective in retaining students in engineering. Building on the Urban Institute evaluation, we divided these strategies into 3 groups: student-focused strategies and practices, faculty-focused strategies and practices, and institutional and departmental-focused strategies and practices. ASEE asked deans and chairs to send us brief descriptions of their most successful departmental and college-wide retention activities in each of these 3 categories. We provided a number of examples found in the literature. We also asked deans and chairs to send us evidence showing that the practices that they highlighted were effective. Best practices identified in the literature were used to code those mentioned in each school's submission. The practices cited by schools span the full range of retention strategies found in the literature. Most schools took a holistic approach to improving retention. Rather than focusing on one approach, they pursued multiple strategies. Academic support and enrichment were the most common, followed by research and work opportunities. Mentioned least often were practices focused on faculty training and student preparation for graduate school. Almost all schools reported that their specific practices furthered the intangible but important goal of developing a community among engineering students and faculty, which contributed to student retention and graduation. We can now circle back to flesh out the institutional departmental policies referenced in the Urban Institute report. Excuse me. The types of curriculum and class enhancements cited by engineering deans and chairs included offering socially relevant curricula that emphasize service learning, moving design and systems courses and practical engineering courses earlier, and integration of projects earlier in the curriculum. Engineering colleges also leverage institutional and educational research in order to develop interventions tied to academic preparation and performance issues, early alert and intervention systems, measuring student learning outcomes, tracking persistence and progression patterns for all students, and looking at disaggregated data for outliers. Collaboration between academic affairs and student affairs, and working with math and physics faculty to integrate engineering examples into pre-engineering coursework were also departmental policies. The points made in this NSF-funded report from the Center for the Advancement of Engineering Education, headquartered at the University of Washington, including Stanford University, were that we have to increase the relevance of what is taught by promoting informed decision-making, building on student interest, embracing diverse mindsets, and attending to the whole learner. At this point, I want to show 4 examples of effective engagement via relevance. I like the message of this 2020 recruitment video from Southern Methodist University. They don't use it anymore, but it was one of my personal favorites, so I'm just going to play this for you.
There are people who deal in big ideas, big implications, big issues. They make plans, history, waves. There's a name for people like that. They break down barriers, problems, illusions. They change landscapes, economies, minds. There's a name for people like that. They study humanity, culture, nature, to shape society, policy, the future. They see challenges as opportunities. There's a name for people like that. You might call these people designers, creators, investigators, explorers, problem solvers, change agents, leaders, visionaries, but we call them engineers. We are the Bobby B. Lyle School of Engineering at SMU.
So I thought that was particularly well done. The NAE Grand Challenge Scholars Program also captures relevance through its 5 project pillars for all participating students: hands-on, interdisciplinary, entrepreneurship, global awareness, and service learning. Some schools have entire academic programs to demonstrate social relevance, such as humanitarian engineering at the Colorado School of Mines and the University of San Diego's focus on change-making engineers. A curricular innovation that I also find particularly compelling is offered by Engineering Projects and Community Service, EPICS. This model, which began at Purdue and is now global, connects engineering students with local nonprofits, satisfying the students' needs to feel social relevance. It's part of the formal curriculum. It engages students across all 4 years and provides cascade mentoring by near peers and teaches key engineering lessons like the importance of proper documentation by committing future classes to maintain and upgrade the work done by student teams in prior years. I'd like now to speak to specific actions on campus that can be taken to enhance diversity. In 2014, ASEE held, 2014, ASEE held a workshop with NAE to outline what can be done on campuses to enhance diversity. Participant observations included many of the points previously made: reinforcing academic knowledge, enhancing pedagogic knowledge at all levels, strengthening organizational receptivity to diversity. In other words, we can't just fix students. We have to create more welcoming and supportive environments. Enhancing economic enablement of students, enhancing stakeholder communication and action, and increasing diversity research and policy development. We can productively assume, if you're not willing to concede, you can assume that bias exists and manage our systems accordingly. We can replicate implicit supports explicitly for all and actively seek to broaden inclusion in professional and social networks and mitigate stereotype threat. A key part of creating more welcoming environments is recognizing that bias may exist in so-called objective measures. For example, we know that the GRE does not predict academic success, yet it screens out many women and minorities from our most selective institutions at the graduate level. Similar observations can be made about the SAT and the ACT at the undergraduate level. Academic reactions to COVID-19 may present us with an opportunity to change this, but we have to be careful that the new measures put in place as replacements are not similarly biased. In 2015, ASCE's engineering deans committed to specific actions to enhance diversity, including developing a diversity plan, undertaking implicit bias training, undertaking an annual equity and inclusion climate survey, engaging in at least one K-12 pipeline activity with accountability measures, engaging in partnerships between research-intensive engineering schools and non-doctoral minority-serving institutions, and increasing women and minority faculty hires. To date, the pledge has been signed by more than 250 deans, including your outgoing dean, and I'm sure your incoming dean will as well. To accelerate the achievement of the Diversity Pledge goals, ASCE is publicly recognizing those engineering and engineering technology colleges that make significant, measurable progress in increasing the diversity, inclusion, and degree attainment outcomes of their programs. Recognition occurs at 3 levels: bronze, silver, and gold. Bronze is the baseline, and institutions have 3 years to operate at the bronze level before they can compete for the silver level, which requires measurable progress, and the gold, which requires serving as a community resource. I'd like to return to the discussion of engineering curricula by putting the curricula in a historical context. In my view, since Sputnik was launched into orbit on October 4, 1957, engineers in the US have been called upon to respond to a series of geopolitical or geoenvironmental threats. It seems these threats are now repeating and combining, such that we're now facing threats, in quotes, defined by China, climate change, and demographics. In response to each of these threats, we've defined different ideal engineering archetypes. And to produce these archetypes, we have various foci in engineering education. With regard to underrepresented minority students, the creation of minority engineering program offices was a major intervention program initiated by Ray Landis at Cal State LA with support from ARCO Foundation back in the late 1980s. Various studies were done on interventions to create better prepared students, but this line of research was diminished by Sheila Tobias's They're Not Dumb, They're Different in 1990. And as I mentioned before, Seymour and Hewitt's talking about leaving, which led to a greater focus on understanding students and their focus on learning. The focus on education systems is seen in the work of University of Washington's Center for the Advancement of Engineering Education, NAE Center for the Advancement of Scholarship on Engineering Education, and more recently in the Business Higher Education Forum's Dynamical Systems Model. I'd like to now return to some examples of direct input from the community with regard to the types of things we should be doing. Allow me to summarize findings from a series of reports ASEE issued from 2014 to 2018. Phase 1 focused on the views of industry. Phase 2 focused on student views. Phase 3 focused on gender equity, and Phase 4 focused on the views of faculty and professional societies. Key outcomes from the workshop with industry leaders were calls for industry to provide greater input on the skills desired in graduates, as well as to provide internships for students and faculty. The and faculty is important because of the view that it's hard to teach the leading edge of industrial practice without industrial experience, and consulting alone wasn't deemed sufficient. These industry leaders also called for universities to place a higher premium on quality teaching. Key outcomes of the workshop with students, mostly repeat points already made in this talk. A desire for curricula that better reflects real-world practice, a desire for more engaged teaching, and a desire for more supportive learning environments. The third workshop was added specifically at NSF's request to consider diversity issues with respect to women, but some of the lessons are generic, so let's take it in greater detail. The 4 frames model shown on this slide has been used by the Women in Engineering Proactive Network, WEPAN, and was developed by the Simmons Center for Gender and Organizations. The first frame is to equip the underrepresented group member by minimizing differences in knowledge and experience with members of the majority population. We can do this by connecting the individual with role models with similar demographic backgrounds as existence proofs of future success. By using real-world engineering examples, that's becoming a consistent recommendation, using the real-world engineering examples, providing research opportunities, and emphasizing social relevance. The second frame is to create equal opportunity by eliminating, or probably more realistically, minimizing barriers and bias via policy-based interventions. Example activities in the graduate, student, postdoc, faculty domains include basing hiring decisions on objective information and criteria, decentralizing admissions to academic units, to the maximum extent masking gender and ethnicity identifiers, and instituting inclusive practices. The third frame is valuing difference. As previously indicated, this means actively understanding that diversity is a key contributor to innovation and improved performance. Recommendations in this frame include introducing diversity metrics into accreditation. This is something that ABET, formerly the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology, is trying to figure out how to do now. Hiring and promoting members of underrepresented populations. Ensuring diversity in the candidate pool. Consider a version of football's Rooney Rule, which is seeing increased popularity in business settings. That is, no candidate pool is accepted unless at least one member of an underrepresented population is in the final interview pool. And identifying and supporting diversity champions. The fourth frame calls for revisioning engineering culture by focusing on underlying systemic factors that lead to inequality. This frame is the most challenging as it requires not only identifying diversity, equity, and inclusion as institutional college departmental values, but also accepting the pervasiveness of bias, even if unconscious. And it also means actively working to change the policies and procedures of the core ecosystem. In the case of academic engineering, this includes granting agencies and professional societies. The final of the 4 workshops focused on professional societies and faculty. Recommended professional society resources for faculty included courseware portals with case studies and course modules, including those focused on ethics, instructional guidance including on evidence-based teaching, and more rewards for innovative ideas and incentives for gathering industry experience. Recommended professional society activities for students include financial support for conference attendance. Many societies already do this. More integration of students into conferences, providing student career services, and offering instructional videos on various aspects of society organization and activities. Recommendations were also offered on the organization of professional societies themselves. We can go back to these if there's specific interest during the Q&A session. So now we draw to a close with some key findings, key lessons. Thinking about how you transition from where you are to where you want to be, I think the guidance offered in this report by the Royal Academy of Engineering and MIT is very solid. It notes that change is driven by acknowledged need and is only sustained if a cross-section of faculty and administrators are engaged with strong leadership support. Department-wide approaches are necessary. Larger is okay. And innovations must be embedded in the core curriculum. Assessment is good. Impact evaluation is better. My key takeaways are that comprehensive efforts are required and that students from underrepresented populations in general and underrepresented minority students in particular want what all students want, which is to be challenged, engaged, inspired, and supported. And they want to contribute to the betterment of the human condition and to the protection of the planet. Now, even though I told myself to talk slowly, apparently I went a little long because I am ready for your questions and we've got all kinds of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fortenberry. Your talk your slides that you shared definitely, I think will stimulate conversation. And so there's that Q&A box that's at the bottom towards the right-hand side, and you can type questions in there, and I will share them with our speaker. Until then, I would like to ask a question in terms of the recommendations that came forward. There was one specifically about faculty support. And so as we pivot to address the inequities in STEM and engineering and promote excellence through instruction as well as research, do you think it's the responsibility of engineering and STEM faculty to teach about power, privilege, social identity, unconscious bias, so that students don't just walk away knowing that these are important, but that they understand that these things are connected to engineering, connected to them directly, and are professional characteristics that they need to acquire?
Absolutely. And let me say how that can be done in context. So I think most, if not all, engineering students take design classes one or more times. Some schools now have an introductory design class for first-year students. In the context of design, it makes sense to challenge students to think through how is something cited? Where is it located? Why was it in that location? How is it to be used? Let me give you a very simple example. I referenced before the Center for Advancement of Engineering Education at the University of Washington. They did verbal protocol analyses of students during the design of a playground for younger students. Glittering generalities, I'm going to overgeneralize to make a point. They found that, again, broad generalities, the male students were focused on, okay, what are the forces in the swing set? You know, what's the friction on the slide? In general, the women students were saying, well, where is this program? Where is this playground located? What are the ages of the students who are going to use it? What times of day will it be used? Those things affect the environment and the needs of that playground system. So those user characteristics defined how that thing would be used and needed to be thought of in the design process. Similarly, there is an opportunity when, in a different example, say you're a transportation engineer and you're trying to design a city bus system, you may need to think about, well, why is the most direct route have an overpass that this bus can't fit under? And it just happens that there are large numbers of economically challenged, otherwise known as poor folks, on one side of the overpass, and the beach or whatever recreational activity is on the other side of the overpass that this bus can't reach. And so we got to design this really long, circuitous route for the bus to get through. It is perfectly legitimate in that context to talk about how that type of separation of the city's population happened. We see issues as well right now around COVID-19 vaccine distribution. There are challenges now that you've heard on the news with vaccine sites being low. Well, we put it in the community center. Well, the community center happens to be in the more resource enriched neighborhood, but we know that the challenge in terms of people getting access to the vaccine are in the resource deprived neighborhood. So what else can we use as a distribution center if we don't have the nice, neat community center to use? So in thinking about the context of large scale engineering design, these issues naturally come in, and they come in as well. I can create as many examples at the smaller scale as well. So yes, absolutely appropriate to do that.
There's some questions that are coming in through the Q&A that I'll start with. I'll start with this one. Can you say more about assessment is good, but impact evaluation is better?
Sure. So assessments are formative, which is, in process, and then summative, which is after things are done. You ask questions about how an individual has done as a result of the intervention. You talk about, was the intervention, did it happen the way that you wanted it to happen? all of those are wonderful questions that need to be asked so that you can do an improvement of the program model for the next group or whatever. Impact is what's changed, what is qualitatively and quantitatively changed, not only in terms of a student intervention, that individual students' performance, but the overall performance of the group and their changes in attitudes, their self-efficacy, their belief in their ability to succeed. That is impact. So in the 90s, NSF had, under the Government Performance and Results Act, they talked about outputs and outcomes. And there's a distinction between what is the output of a system and what is the outcome of that system's operation. And an impact analysis is to look at those outcomes and not simply the outputs.
Thank you. The next question here is, many research-focused units, example, research centers, can provide engagement activities for current undergraduate students as well as community youth considering engineering. Do you have advice on how these centers can support engineering education?
Yes. Well, let me mention up front before I forget, the Engineering Research Centers program at the National Science Foundation on their website has, or at least they had as of 6 months ago, a manual that is publicly available that distills best practices from all of the engineering research, from at the time they did it, the engineering research centers. Within that very large, voluminous, long manual is a section on outreach activities of the engineering research centers. So there's a wealth of information there, documented, publicly available on the web, that you should look up and definitely make an effort to access. Glittering generalities, I would say, is tying, to the extent that you can, tie the activity of your research center to your outreach activity. That is, if you're doing research on car batteries, I'm inventing, you want to do an outreach activity that's age appropriate. So whether it's high school students, middle school students, elementary school students, age appropriate, talk about energy storage and use. And that ties what you're doing, what the researchers are doing, to the educational outreach. But I think you have to be realistic in terms of what you're able to achieve in an outreach that's tied to an active research area. Is not something where your goal is not to create, depending upon the age level, future researchers immediately. Your goal is to demonstrate one aspect or an aspect or several aspects maybe of active engineering research that is tied to making the world demonstrably better in some way. We have a real problem in engineering in having non-engineers understand that we make the world a better place. You know, people say, I want to be a doctor, I want to save lives. You know, planes falling out of the air is not a good way to save lives. Bridges falling down is not a good way to save lives. Defibrillators failing is not a good way to save lives. So I just noticed that all of those were examples of failures. So a failed system does not save lives. But engineers also improve the quality of life. We're on Zoom or some variation thereof because a lot of engineers did some work in broadband, in telecommunications, in video compression, etc. The practice of engineering is improving the quality of human life. And we need to communicate that better and more often than the old message. Oh, if you're very good at math and science and you're willing to study 20 hours a day and you really put a lot of effort into it, you too might become an engineer. We've got to say why that is a good thing. And we need to do that much better. And again, there's a whole literature on that out of the National Academy of Engineering on messaging, etc. We just need to work on that.
Thank you. The next question, how can we get consistency of involvement of local engineering corporations with their local colleges and universities that have engineering departments?
So it comes down to what you mean by involvement. If you're talking about internships for your students, then most companies see the immediate return on investment in hiring interns. They get that. If you talk about support for research and your research is directly tied to an innovation that will lead to a new product in the market, most companies will see that, I think. Although the funds available for research have been decreasing as companies become more and more short-sighted because of the stock market and next quarter and that focus on, short-term focus. If what you're talking about is having them thinking about the shape and the content of the curriculum without necessarily being tied to the students who are coming out next cycle, some companies will see the value in that because they see it as in their long-term interest. And if you have a close relationship, if you don't wait until the last minute to say, we want money for this, if you explain the intent is to improve the quality and the flexibility of the engineering graduate, and they can expect, as they always have, to have some fraction of those students as part of their yield, then they will see the value of investing in the curriculum, because an investment in curriculum is an investment that pays off continually over time, as opposed to a one-shot investment in a single student. So it's all about, it's a lot like how you deal with your local politicians. You don't wait until the crisis to bring them on campus, to show them around, to let them know what you're doing, why you're doing, how you're doing. You build a continuing relationship so that when things do get, there's a call for an immediate need for something, they are more likely to listen.
Thank you. And Dr. Fortenberry, you mentioned students, something
Yes.
that's obviously very important on both ends. And so a question comes up, how do we as students advocate for making these changes? So the recommendations that were brought forward, a lot of what you've spoken are things that we know, but
Sure.
Students sometimes want to be involved with bringing these changes forward.
Well, I think students have to communicate their desires. There are a number of institutions, my alma mater is one of them, where because of persistent, well-researched student advocacy, they were willing to make a change. At MIT, I'm a mechanical engineer. There is the degree, there's the standards track mechanical engineering degree, and then there's the as recommended by, which isn't as strict, the narrow mechanical engineering degree. Mechanical engineering is course 2, as recommended by is 2A. The enrollment in the 2A is now larger than the enrollment in course 2. And the department had to recognize that demand by students choosing that alternate pathway and that alternate track. And, ABET was obviously flexible in terms of the accreditation of each track. So I think students, as they become more aware, have to do their own research about what it is they're interested in, why they're interested in it, and how it ties to whatever their career goal is. If you're saying, look, I need to be trained not only in, if I'm a mechanical engineer, thermodynamics, but optics, or I want to take some courses in computing, and this is my career goal, and you talk about that with your advisor, then institutions should be able to find a pathway to allow you to do that. As the individual, it's obviously challenging for the single individual, but you have student groups. I assume there are student sections of the major engineering societies who can come together to make that point within their departments as well, about a need for flexibility in the technical curriculum in order to achieve technical career outcomes, or to have flexibility for technologically informed non-technical outcomes where the engineering degree is the basis for a different career pathway.
The next question here is, interdisciplinary research has historically been forwarded as one of the best methods of tackling wicked problems and is predicated on disciplinary diversity, contributing to more robust and thoughtful solutions.
Yep.
Do you see linkages between this process and the increased innovation that may be a product of racial, gender diversity, etc.? Do you believe that they share a skill set? Is it a diverse engineering cohort one that is more ready or interdisciplinary research?
Sure. So yes, diversity is a broad term. It refers to gender, it refers to ethnicity, it refers to national culture, it refers to discipline. Anytime you get people together with different ways of looking at things, you're going to think through a problem more creatively because you've looked at it from more angles. That to me just stands to reason. And so yes, absolutely. Yes, so that's done. The challenge, though this wasn't in the question, I will throw it up anyway. The challenge is as we bring together interdisciplinary teams and ways of working, and particularly interdisciplinary research, we haven't thought through at the doctoral level, when we have teams of students attacking a problem, how to truly have interdisciplinary, as opposed to multiple disciplines working together, interdisciplinary work, and yet separate that out for the individual assessment that we're going to want for the doctoral defense. And that is something that a number of schools in a variety of disciplines, engineering and science, are trying to think through. But that's a real challenge because there absolutely is a premium on the interdisciplinary approach to problems, but we're still operating in a paradigm where we're looking at individual contribution and individual effort. I mean, it's not as bad in engineering as it is in the sciences, where you have papers published that have 45, 50, 60 authors to work out. But yes, interdisciplinary absolutely improves the quality of the engineering solutions that are developed.
There's an example that one of the participants shared that I will read for your thoughts. At a department level meeting, I once asked about a semi-blind process for initial review of a graduate student application, in which we didn't immediately share the applicant's sex or race with the rest of the admissions committee. The faculty chair laughed and said we couldn't do it because that's how we identify individuals for affirmative action. Do you have any thoughts on that reasoning?
Yes, I do. Okay, so I'm censoring and editing, but let me come up with my thoughts. So in the arts community, the performance arts community, they have for some time now done blind auditions. That is, they put the candidate with their cello, violin, flute, voice, whatever, well, voice is hard, behind a screen, have them perform, and you don't see their race, ethnicity, gender, etc. That is the value of judging the performance and not the individual and the characteristics they bring to it. One. Two, to the best of my knowledge, affirmative action does not request, require, or demand any lowering of standards. Make that point explicit and loud, except I'm not yelling. As I said in the GRE example, we need to think about where we draw lines and why we draw them. So let's talk about a two-step process. Let's talk about former NSFer. You get lots of proposals in. You define a pool of substantially equal merit based on some objective criteria that is above threshold, however you want to define threshold, but let's be reasonable in how we define threshold. That can be done in a gender, and racially blind manner. Within that pool of substantially equal merit, at the federal level, we look for geographic representation. We look for distribution among small schools and large schools, research ones and community colleges, et cetera. We try to balance the demographics of the pool of substantially equal merit for funding. And if we can do that at NSF for awards, you can do that within your institution for students. It all comes down to, let's have a big fight over what is a pool of substantially equal merit. And we've already demonstrated, the research is there, that the GRE, drawing a line, at some arbitrary level on a GRE that automatically excludes large numbers of women and minorities, is not the way we define a pool of substantially equal merit. Because we can look at who gets out and what are their characteristics. We can do a backward mapping of the people who get through and say, well, what was required for this person to get through? And it wasn't that GRE line that you drew. We have the data on that.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that answer. And I know I heard you loud and clear without the yelling. So thank you. We are at the end of our time here.
Okay.
It goes so quickly. For those of you who still had questions in the Q&A box, know that we will share the recording and the series will continue on. And so hopefully some of your questions that weren't addressed this evening will be covered later on. You'll continue these conversations within your unit with your colleagues, continuing to engage. And so, Dr. Fortenberry, I'd like to extend a big virtual thank you for joining us this evening. Your talk was definitely inspiring and provided us with data-driven best practices and strategies to keep us engaging in this very, very important work. I'd like to thank all of the students, staff, faculty, senior leaders, guests, alumni, colleagues from across the country who joined us this evening, who took time out of your busy schedules. And so we certainly appreciate that. Our short time together, we've certainly acquired some really good ideas and some insight on how together as a STEM community and as Buckeye engineers, and we share the V when needed, we will continue our path forward to address the inequities in STEM education. And as a gentle reminder, before we close out this evening, please join us next Wednesday at 6 p.m. as we continue this lecture series with None Shall Perish with Dr. Kelly Mack, again, next Wednesday, March 10th at 6 p.m. And you can visit go.osu.edu/inclusive STEM, one word, go.osu.edu/inclusive STEM, one word, for more details on upcoming speakers. So again, thank you everyone for joining us this evening and enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.
Thank you and good night.